Good morning. It's Monday, September 8th, 2014. This is your morning edition on I-24 News. Coming up later today, reports of escalating tensions between Hamas and Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah party threaten to break up the recently formed Palestinian Unity government. Deadly shelling in Mariupol and blasts in Donetsk raise fears that the ceasefire deal signed between the Ukrainian government and Russian rebels could collapse. And later on the show, apparently September 5th is Bill Murray Day, or at least the Canadians think so. We will explain why. Good morning. I'm Yael Avi, and first to our main topic of the day. Has the Palestinian Unity government reached its breaking point? Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has said he will disband the recently unified Palestinian government unless Hamas stops operating its own shadow government in the Gaza Strip. In comments he made to the Palestinian media upon touching down in Cairo this Saturday, Mr. Abbas demanded one authority, one gun, and one law, to quote him. He also complained that the unity government is not able to do anything at the moment in the Gaza Strip due to Hamas's actions. Now, to hear more about what appears to be a looming crisis within the Palestinian Authority, we are joined in studio by Dr. Benedetta Berti, Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies and lecturer at Tel Aviv University. Good morning to you. And, of course, by Oded Granot, head of the Middle East Desk for Israel's Channel 1. Good morning to you as well.
Good morning,
But before we break this down, let's take a look at the following report.
The future of the Palestinian Unity government seems to be cloudier than ever, and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is not afraid to make it even more murky. Abbas is now determined to gain control over the situation regarding both Hamas and Israel, and his decisive approach is leaving no room for confusion. With Abbas sending extremely sharp messages to Hamas saying that the current partnership between the group and the Palestinian Authority will not last unless the situation in Gaza improves and Hamas accepts Ramallah's demands, the cards are now being dealt anew. The ultimatum is clear. Either the political wing of Hamas will disconnect from the military wing and partner with Abbas, or the unity government will be deemed to have failed, and the rehabilitation of the Gaza Strip that hadn't even begun will not progress. The salary of Hamas officials will not be paid. Construction materials will not be transferred smoothly. The crossing will remain mostly shut, and waves of arrest of Hamas activists by the Palestinian Authority throughout the West Bank will continue. Hence, Hamas's ability to rule the Gaza Strip will be extremely highly slim. Abbas is about to present the Arab League with his new peace initiative regarding Israel, and here as well he says that if there will be no cooperation, all the options are on the table. He's willing to set a timetable for Israel to respond to his new diplomatic initiative, and if it won't, the Palestinian Authority will both appeal to international institutions and will stop the security coordination with Israel. Abbas, who has regained some confidence since the recent conflict between Israel and Hamas, seems to be holding some firm war plans. Whether his threats are real or not, in 18 days the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas will expire, and as the military wing of Hamas is already threatening to renew its rocket fire if its demands will not be met, Abbas might lose his strength in all fronts.
Oded Granot, head of the Middle Eastern Desk for Israel's Channel 1, I'd like to start with you. First of all, Abbas, can he do that? Can he actually dissolve the unity government? Will that be something that will be accepted within the Palestinian street?
Of course he can. I think what Abbas realized is, after the war especially, that instead of being the president of the future Palestinian state, in the eyes of Hamas, he has become the finance secretary. Hamas wants him to collect the money, to bring the money for construction in Gaza, for the salaries for the former Hamas employees in Hamas government, rather than control Gaza and control the future one state.
Right.
And in fact, the relationship, in my opinion, the relationship between Hamas and Fatah have reached their lowest ebb since Hamas took over Gaza in 2007. It's a combination of personal disgust, I would say, for Abu Mazen, for Khaled Mash'al, and ideological and mistrust between Fatah and Hamas, especially after they executed, more than 100 people during the war, some of them Fatah, innocent Fatah, no people who cooperated with Israel.
But speaking of that, people who cooperated with Israel, and Dr. Benedetta, I'd like to turn to you. Speaking of 2007, within Gaza, right after Hamas won the democratically won, we have to say, the election. There was a bloody takeover by Hamas. They were basically taking Fatah people on the roof. They were, killing them in various ways, throwing them off the roof. Can there even be a unity between those two factions that will ever hold? Because this is a tribal dispute in many ways, isn't it?
Well, I would say it's, for many extent and purposes, it's a political dispute that goes back to the very early days of a Hamas formation. Hamas' very own formation set itself up to be the Islamic alternative to the nationalist Fatah. And since then, I would say politically, they have never seen really eye to eye. There are very strong ideological differences. And on top of that, there's, of course, also personal differences. So this is not a new situation. The situation in which there are great disparities it's not new. But what has changed since 2007 up until the spring of 2014, when the unity government was announced, was that both parties came for the first time to a real place of need. They came to this unity government from a point of relative weakness, both of them, and both of them needed it to score popularity
because
points.
what? Because Hamas lost the Muslim Brotherhood, because Hamas... Okay.
Yeah, very different reasons. If you look at Hamas, of course, Hamas was at its weakest point, more regionally isolated in Gaza. They lost Egypt. Egypt had been cracking down severely on Hamas, cracking down on the sources of funding. So Hamas needed a way out. And from Fatah's perspective, what was the impending failure of the political process with Israel was already complicating an already precarious situation in terms of its popularity on the ground. So both of them would have a unity deal which would be able to go back to Palestine and deliver something that the people had been asking for since 2007. Is it enough to keep it going? I'm not sure, but it was a good starting point.
And that's exactly the point, which I want to go back to you, Odette Grenot, is Fatah, as you started saying, and I'd like to expand on that. Is Abu Mazen, is Mahmoud Abbas, President Mahmoud Abbas, even still a valid player within the Palestinian society? Because if, to the layman's eye, if you look at the latest conflict between Israel and Hamas, the Palestinians feel, and some may argue rightfully so, that Hamas comes out a triumphant winner out of it. It basically, managed to destabilize Israel's communities. Abbas was not a player in this at all. Is he even somebody who can lead the Palestinians?
Something interesting happened to Abu Mazen when he reached Cairo. For the first time, I hear him saying, shooting at all direction. He say, I'm fed up with Hamas. I'm fed up with the occupation. Recently, he said, I'm fed up with, ruling the Palestinian Authority. I may put the keys on the table and leave. He also has some thought about this. He has reached, at the stage which he thinks that, he cannot do what he wants. He won't get something from Israel. Hamas he doesn't trust. He believes truly that Hamas tried to kill him. And this is when he was about to visit Gaza, a couple of years ago. Right. They dig the tunnel. They're special in tunnels, as you know. They know how to dig a tunnel. Yeah. Yes. So they try to kill him. They try to take over Gaza. The plan that was revealed by the Israeli Shabak, and Abu Mazen believes in it. And he told Marshall, you try to make a coup d'etat. You think Hamas they are lying to him all the time, while they say they didn't take any responsibility for the murder of 3 Israeli young people in the West Bank later to be revealed and responsibility taken by some Hamas official. From all that reason, Abu Mazen thinks that he reached a point in which he either do something on the political sphere, that he all the time was resisted fiercely any violence against Israel. And that's one of the main differences between him and Hamas. Say, I'm not for violence, I'm for political solution. So he reached a point, and it's going to happen this month. He said it clearly in Cairo. He's going to the Security Council. By the way, yesterday he won the support of the Arab League. He's going to the Security Council. He's going to put a plan for withdrawal of Israel from the West Bank, setting a deadline for 3 years for Israel to withdraw from the West Bank.
But haven't we heard this plan before coming out of the Palestinian Authority? It's something that we've heard about a year ago.
We have heard it before, but what's happened now is that, number one, we are after the war in Gaza.
Right.
Hamas placed itself in an awkward position by executing people in the streets, putting itself, on the same level with Daesh. Everybody looks at Hamas like Daesh. They have no money. And people look at Abu Mazen, even in Jerusalem, they won't admit it, as the key person, the one who could get something out of this mess. And I think that some of the attacks of Abu Mazen against, the criticism against Hamas, is to win U.S. support in putting some pressure on Israel to move ahead on the political sphere. That's why I'm behaving badly, you know.
Right.
I'm behaving badly. I'm attacking. I'm criticizing Hamas, justly so, but I want to have your support, and I think it may have, somebody who listens we may have someone
in the Western sphere. And Dr. Madani, I want to ask you, because it sounds like that Abbas is actually kowtowing to the Western society, the United States, to get that support. But within the Palestinian street, does that even hold water?
Well, that's part of the problem, part of the criticism that has been waged against Abbas in the past, especially in the past few weeks during the wars, is especially that he's talking to the international community, especially that he's found a great understanding and cooperation with Israel and sort of forgotten Palestine. That was a common theme during the last round of hostilities between Israel and Hamas. But I think Abbas is also talking, he's also catering his message internally. And that's where he's talking about the violence and the cost of the war. And he's telling Palestinian society the cost of the war was not worth it. Hamas has not really achieved anything for you yet. And he put it squarely on Hamas. He said, I firmly believe the cost of the war, the victims, it's Hamas's fault, and they have to bear the cost and the consequences. That's internally directed, and it's part of a very complicated political game, because right now Hamas is the more popular political party.
No, and it has been for several years, and that's why I'm trying to think.
If I may,
please go ahead.
What's particularly interesting, that's not a complete surprise, but what happens after this round of wars is that Hamas' popularity skyrockets, and this time it skyrocketed even before than usual, even more than November 2012. Right now, Hamas is the most popular political party according to reliable polls, both in Gaza and in the West Bank. If there were to be Palestinian presidential elections tomorrow and Ania was a candidate, it would get even more votes than Barghouti. That's a completely new development.
I would rather disagree on this. I know this.
If I may finish.
Okay.
Go for it.
Now, the point with this is that this is not a new trend. It happens it happens immediately after every hostility between Hamas and Israel. However, what we know from studying public opinion is that it's normally a short-term effect. So it lasts for a couple of months, and during these 2 months, Hamas normally go all in to try to solidify and back this short-term popularity with political gains. If that doesn't happen, then the popularity goes back down. Abbas knows that, and that's also part of the game they're playing.
Trying to capitalize, but you disagree with that. I mean, Barghouti is still a player. Think in the West Bank, Hamas
I know the survey, the survey done by Khalil Shkaki that shown that the popularity of Hamas has risen after the war, and it's normal, you know. Always after war, you know, somebody who shoot at Israel score some points in the public opinion.
Yeah, but this is a span of time where there's a war every 2 years, so can't they capitalize on that popularity?
I think that that when the time is passing, people realize in the West Bank and Gaza that Hamas gained nothing from this war, only destruction. Only destruction, really. I mean, they don't have the harbor, they don't have the airport, they don't have the siege lifted, they don't have the money, they don't have the salaries, they don't have the Rafah crossing open, because the Egyptians are tough with them. So the question is, now, I agree.
Aren't we being naive, though? I mean, because those are things, those are things that have been going on for a while.
I think that Abu Mazen now has to present something else. And it's true that he has to tell his public, you know, his audience, look, Hamas gained nothing, I can get you something. I'm trying to lead you to the political sphere.
Right.
He has to produce something which will give a horizon for the Palestinian people. There is a battle inside the Palestinian Authority, inside the Palestinian in the West Bank, you know, between the old generation and the young generation. Muhammad Dakhlan is waiting in Cairo or in the Gulf. He wants to take over. Barghouti in jail. They want to see a new generation coming. But this is different from Hamas. Nobody in the West Bank would like to be ruled by Hamas. They know their affiliation with the Muslim Brotherhood. They don't like the way Hamas. The fact that Hamas executed, Fatah people,
right.
Everybody knows exactly. The Fatah is in a bad position. I mean, the Fatah should renovate itself, should bring up new ideas, new leaders. This is true. The Fatah, is for many years now, has not produced.
Well, they've garnered really a bad reputation at the end of the day. I think if you go into Gaza and you see the houses that Fatah built for itself when it was in power,
yes.
That's the type of thing that people, even in the West Bank, still believe in. I'm wondering with you, Dr. Mandati, do you agree that in the West Bank, Fatah is more powerful, or Hamas is actually gaining traction and becoming a key player?
Well, I think Hamas is a key player in the Palestinian political arena now. Its
of course,
popularity...
but in the West Bank itself, because I think as Israelis would like to think is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the West Bank is this haven that, okay, still Fatah there's somebody there that we can speak with. There's somebody there that actually we can pick up the phone and try to, if somebody actually sits down and negotiates one day. But that is changing, or isn't it, according to your opinion?
Well, for sure there is someone Israel can talk to in the West Bank. At the same time, I wouldn't say everybody in the West Bank support Fatah, far from it. And I also would say that there is sort of a mirror image of abuses on both sides. For Hamas executing Fatah people in Gaza since 2007, Fatah has not been treating its political prisoners particularly well, and there's really documentation of human rights abuses occurring on both sides. And really on the Palestinian street in the West Bank, there is a plurality of opinion. Palestine is an extremely pluralistic society, but one of the things that comes out over and over is the lack of good governance and the corruption that is associated with the PA under Mahmoud Abbas, just as it was before. So that's something that complicates the popularity record. And then, of course, and that explains also this unity government, that the lack of progress on the political front, the lack of progress in the negotiation with Israel, weakens Abbas, weakens Fatah, weakens the entire process, the entire project, and gives more voice and power to alternatives like Hamas, and that makes sense.
To extreme alternatives usually,
exactly.
which rise on that. I want to touch.
Hamas initially was perceived as a clean organization, uncorrupted. It doesn't
exist. That's how they sold
it
themselves.
It doesn't exist any longer. People know exactly how Hamas took 20 or 30% commission from anything coming into Gaza from Sinai, from elsewhere. They know that how they took the not only the gasoline, but products that were imported to Gaza. First for Hamas, even after the war.
Right.
And then, maybe what the remaining is for the population. Everybody in Gaza knows that. I mean, they are fearful of Hamas. They are scared of Hamas. Otherwise, they would have come out in street and say, we didn't want this war. And eventually, if you ask yourself why the war stopped, it stopped because people were starting rising up and say, enough is enough. I mean, you get us nothing. I mean, you shoot your rocket more than 3,000.
You think that one of the reasons the Palestinians in Gaza said, enough is enough?
Absolutely. I want to tell you what happened. I mean, in the last 2 days of the war, the leadership in Gaza called Khalid Mashal and say, enough is enough. We can't carry any longer. We can't carry any longer. We get nothing. I mean, every day, when the high-rising building was started falling down, they say we can't bear it anymore. And Mashal, the one who resisted all the 60 days,
right.
Any ceasefire with Israel say eventually, okay, you decide. I mean, you're in Gaza. That's what happened.
Yeah, but I mean, one can also say that part of it was also international pressure in Israel, and just because of these buildings falling and and the destructions that was being carried on, I think there was on both sides there seems to be this understanding that they can't get out of it.
The international pressure was stronger at the beginning of the war than at the end of the war. I mean,
right.
There was a pressure, but eventually it was Hamas' decision to go for a ceasefire. Do you
think that's correct?
I think that played a part of it.
Right.
I think a lot of the discussion that went along during the war were internal, and there were sharp disagreements between political leaders, the military wing, and Mashal sits in, of course, in Qatar, so seeing
right.
things from a different perspective. So what happened towards the ceasefire is that I think all these different components of Hamas were able to save face and to think that they could get out of the ceasefire being able to portray it as a victory. all of these components as something that they could market. The military wing had a few military operations they were able to market as victorious, and the political wing went back to Gaza and say, we're getting you a deal where the crossings will be open. They didn't, of course, talk about the fact that in order for that to happen, PA security forces will have to be deployed on the border.
And that's,
but this is about a political frame.
But this is exactly the next point. Speaking of the crossings, and then if we look at Rafah. Well, first of all, if the Egyptians open, Rafah...
They won't.
They won't.
They won't.
You're sure about that?
Yeah. I mean, that's what they say. They will open, the Palestinians want the Rafah crossing to be open 24 hours a day, 24/7, I mean, all days. And the Egyptians say, even now, look, number one, we have to negotiate. Number two, we want Abu Mazen. We don't want to see your faces, you Hamas, at the crossing. We want Abu Mazen people there at the crossing.
Is that something Hamas would ever go for?
Hamas would go for, but when you see the relationship between Hamas and Abu Mazen, so with the big question whether Abu Mazen will rush his people to the crossing. I mean, first Hamas have to accept some of the conditions that Abu Mazen speak of. So the Egyptians are not entitled to give any rewards for Hamas for the war against Israel. Not because they love Israel, but because they hate Hamas. So not going to give any rewards. They're not going to open 24 hours a day Rafah crossing. And that's the big disappointment of Khalid Mashal and the leadership in Gaza. I mean, they expected that at least that would get the Rafah crossing open. Now they don't get this, they don't get the harbor, they don't get the airport, they don't get anything. They say, well, why? The first realization of Hamas that they did a mistake, in my opinion, is that when they realized that more than 3,000 rockets don't cause casualties in Israel in the size and the scope they expected. But it did destabilize
the communities of the country. I mean, it did have an effect. I mean, sadly, one can't say that it didn't have an effect on the community. And in many ways, what you're describing is that Hamas goes back to a situation in Gaza after the ceasefire that's very similar to what was before the last war, let's call it that. But doesn't that, but so does Israel.
But there's one difference. There's one difference. There is no Morsi in Gaza, in Egypt anymore. There's Abdel Fattah Sisi,
right,
the one who hates the guts of Hamas and affiliation with the Basel. He won't give them anything. And they realize that. That's why this is the time for Abu Mazen or someone else who is going to replace him in the new generation to play this winning card. And it's a time for Israel also, to try to come out with an initiative that would show the world that we can do something on the political thing and that the violence would bring Hamas nowhere. Right. This is a crucial time, by the way, because of, as I say, because of the word, look at Hamas now with the execution like Daesh, in a way.
ISIS, yeah.
ISIS. That's no longer ISIS. They are Islamic State. ISIL, yeah. Islamic State,
still,
or whatever.
Bad people.
Very bad people. Very bad people. This is time for Abu Mazen and Israel really to show something to the world that they even start talking. I mean, the timetable that Abu Mazen asked for is unrealistic. I mean, nobody will accept it. I mean, but going back to negotiation, I think even the Prime Minister hinted to it in one of the press conferences that
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin,
that he may open, a future political. Who knows? But this is time for the Abu Mazen.
And Abbas is trying. I would argue he's trying. His recent statement telling Hamas to get its act together to...
That's very strong words, yeah.
One law, one gun. This is not part of the unity deal. The unity deal did not talk about what to do with Hamas security sector, did not say anything about the issue of weapons in Gaza. So now he's up in the ante, he's up in the stakes. And the reason is because now he has something in his hands, and the something is Hamas needs the PA in order to open the crossings, and they also need the PA in order to deliver the international humanitarian assistance and the money to reconstruct Gaza, because the deal, the ceasefire deal, foresees this money to go through the PA and through the unity government. So that's something that it's quite important to Hamas, and that Abbas is trying to play up on.
When Abu Mazen say one regime, one state,
one gun,
one gun, means you Hamas have to give up your weapon. their arsenal of weapons. I mean, this is the first.
But they never will. I mean, let's be realistic here for a second. Do you think they ever will do that? That's right.
But when not Israel and not the U.S., but Abu Mazen put it as a condition, you know, everybody else would look at it very seriously now.
Yeah. Now, not to be, you know, the so-called the party pooper, not to be, you know, optimistic as one would like to be. I'm looking at this like
try to be optimistic.
Try to be optimistic. I know that's the
last tough neighborhood to be optimistic.
Exactly. It's the one last thing that we've got left for us. But I'm trying to think of this last one. This is going to go to the two of you. This last operation, and as we said at the beginning of this discussion, every 2 years we have a round like this. There are reports over the course of the last several days, and sadly, I have to say, back in operation, in the 2009 operation, which was Cast-led, okay, we came in, a bunch of journalists into Gaza, and you know they were rebuilding tunnels, they were being refinanced once again. I mean, what do we think that this is actually something that we'll see even in a shorter period of time? Because there are reports that this is happening again in Gaza right now. And who's financing them other than Qatar?
No, Qatar, but no Qatari money goes now into Gaza. Mm-hmm. That's number one. Number two, the Egyptian gradually but quite effectively are closing the tunnels, which made Hamas smuggle, bring all this weapon inside. There is a change on the ground in Gaza now.
Right.
And what I would come, if I was somebody who takes a decision in Israel, I would come up with a suggestion and say, you want a harbor, Hamas? I'm going to give you a harbor. But you have to disarm yourself. I mean, if you ask anybody, any passenger, to leave the arm out of the airplane or the ship, that should be asked from, should be demanded from Hamas as well. So there is something changing on the ground. Hamas is in a worse position now, even if you compare it to the state when he started this war. We have to use this opportunity. Abu Mazen, the U.S. has to, Egypt has to use this opportunity and try to change things on the ground.
Finally, really quickly, Dr. Benedetti, same question to you. Do you think that this is a golden opportunity, or are we being too optimistic, or are we looking at the next round, given a refueling of Hamas's attempt to open tunnels, get more guns? Are we looking at another war in a few months?
Very much depends what happened. I would say it's quite possible if the parameters don't change. So far, the parameters have only been structured around this mutual deterrent security approach. It hasn't really worked. And perhaps if things change and move forward towards a more political approach, towards reintegrating Gaza economically into the West Bank, towards bringing the PA on the borders and opening those crossing, towards making Gaza much more feasible, then perhaps we will change the course of events. Otherwise, I don't see how we will avoid another escalation.
Because there was a feeling, and sadly so, that this seemed to be like the independence war for Hamas. They were going all the way out. But Oded Granot, thank you for joining me. Dr. Benedetti, it's the same to you. Coming up next, the ceasefire between the Ukrainian government and Russian-backed separatists appeared endangered this weekend as shelling resumed around the city of Mariupol. First, though, let's hear some more of this morning's headlines. Good morning, and thank you for joining us, staying with us, and yes, it's time. Let's say hello and good morning. I'm very excited to Anthony Grant, who joins me daily to discuss the news you missed while scanning the headlines. But before anything else, and there's going to be serious stuff, did you miss me?
I missed you like the deserts missed the rain. I mean,
Sting me.
You know, it's like, no, I don't know whoever said that, but absolutely every day. And a long, challenging summer it has been.
A very long, challenging
everybody.
summer it has been. No,
but, and I'm sure that the events of the past summer will be informing a lot of the things we talk about in the days and weeks ahead.
No, I'm sure.
So as excited as I am to see you, and we're going to jump right into it with this interesting headline from Haaretz.
Yes, which
basically says that the Israeli Foreign Ministry has proposed an international force in Gaza and favors EU, that's European Union troops. Now, This classified document was released 2 weeks ago, but now the press coverage is coming out. And, you know, talking about this idea to station a European Union membered force in the Gaza Strip and around it to monitor demilitarization, it could be a little optimistic.
Very optimistic. I think, you know, to the unsuspecting eye of somebody who does not live in the Middle East, you know, be like, well, you know what, good idea. Let's put in a third party to control these two, internationalize these two. But it sounds to me a little bit erotic. It remind me of, I don't remember what time it was when everybody was talking about, you know, or floating the idea of make Jerusalem an international city. And that's always things that will never happen, right?
Well, the European Union did take part in guarding the Rafah crossing up until a few years ago, and once trouble started, they just vanished.
Bye-bye.
So, so they took the first opportunity to leave. And mind you, this is part of the non-cohesive or non-coherent approach of the foreign ministry. When you get a document from the foreign ministry, from the Israeli foreign ministry, you don't know who to attribute it to. Foreign minister, chief of staff,
sources,
Thank
you.
Anonymous, anonymous political, senior anonymous political sources.
Senior anonymous political,
But you know, but I do think that some European countries, maybe France and Germany, are mentioned. You know, would consider this kind of thing, I mean, according to the article. So
listen, on its face, and I love that you brought this. You know, it's not a bad idea, but as I said, people who live in this region, you know, it sounds like somebody's smoking crack.
There,
I said it.
So speaking of strong language, the Times of London has this headline. Let's launch an all-out blitz on jihadists, says Henry Kissinger. So this is strong language coming from, of course, the former U.S. Secretary of State, one of the most famous.
Recently turned 90.
Is quite up there in years, a lot of experience, and he's telling President Barack Obama to launch an all-out attack on ISIS, warning that Americans have become what he calls bystanders in the Middle East. So dangerous stuff that he's talking about.
No, it's very dangerous. And frankly, I think the United States President Barack Obama is going to have to give some form of a speech on this week, discussing his plans. You know.
So we'll be watching what he says, and it's going to match up to what Kissinger prescribes.
Yeah, exactly. It's Kissinger.
Mind you, this Obama speech is going to be on the eve of the 9/11 anniversary, so you know it has many meanings attached to it.
Obama, you know, it jumps right over to this next headline, which he's got a lot of damage control to do in terms of perception come Wednesday because of headlines like this. Obama regrets golfing after Foley death. Now we know that you know, after he addressed the recent murder of journalist James Foley, he basically hit the links pretty quickly, and now he was quoted on Meet the Press saying he should have anticipated the optics of that. The optics. Now, I don't know.
You know, you got to hand it to him. He is the word master.
Yes.
You know, the optics is very nice. You know,
it's like it has something to do with glass. I don't know. But anyway, he's trying to manage the perception that he.
Really quickly, this reminds me of Bush. I don't remember
He should have taken into account that this will be taken into a picture.
I believe
it will be photographed and it will cause some.
And there's the photograph.
Repercussions.
Troubling to say the least. But wasn't it Bush that was also somewhere in a golf course in his house in Texas and in and around the Iraq War? Just, you know,
I mean an avid golfer as well, but you know, anyway, it's something that is separate leisure and politics.
Somewhere in D.C., a Preston officer just lost his job.
Probably.
Yes.
Moving on to actually sticking with the Islamic State problems and crises, The Guardian reported actually from last week that the Silicon Valley firms had actually halted the spread of the Stephen Sotloff beheading video. Now we know that in the first instance of this with Foley, that video made the rounds, and apparently YouTube, others were really trying to be proactive to prevent the dissemination via social networks of the Sotloff beheading video. And this signals sort of a change in Silicon Valley of trying to be more proactive to prevent extremist groups like the Islamic State from using the social
because
platforms.
I think, you know, the big win for, you know, the Islamic State is the fact that even though networks and television channels were not showing this video, you know, it was going viral. Then we're talking about Foley, and that's the win for, you know.
It's a big win, and so I think there is a growing sense that on some level, unwittingly, of course, one would think they're empowering this extremist group, and so now there's an
attempt to.
So hopefully they will pursue that, and of course they have the technical means to do that. So it's having the will and the motivation to do that. Let's talk about sports news. USA Today reports that the Atlantic Hawks control controlling owner, Bruce Levinson, is about to sell his interest in this basketball team following a racist email, which he basically submitted himself to sort of turn himself in to avoid, I don't know, someone else finding out about this email, in which he said that the fan base was too black. So, a little bit of hot water there.
Yeah, I mean, because I was, on a prolonged maternity leave, and wasn't following up on my sports news, which I diligently do,
absolutely,
every single day,
as we all do. But this was, of course,
racism in
with Donald Sterling and the Clippers. This ties into that because now it's become, after that scandal, you have to be so on your guard. And this email actually was from 2 years ago. But one can presume that he didn't want it to surface. He wanted to take the proactive step, and he did. And so here you go. So it's bye-bye Levinson for the Hawks. So.
And one last one.
On a good sports note, Japan is erupting in celebration over 24-year-old Kei Nishikori's win at the U.S. Open. This guy's 24.
Beautiful pronunciation.
Thank you. And he actually lives in Florida. I mean, who knew?
Who knew?
But and Japanese tennis star. So there you go.
Only a Japanese tennis star in Florida can win. Tony, thank you. Stay with us. You'll be with us also the next hour. Yeah. The ceasefire between the Ukrainian government and Russian-backed separatists appeared in danger on Saturday after just a day as several barrages of artillery resumed around the city of Mariupol. Now, soldiers and civilians who have been enduring life on the front line said they doubted that the ceasefire, which came into effect on Friday, would hold after 5 months of warfare. Of course, there is also one casualty over the course of the last several days. And we are very happy to be joined in studio by Foreign Affairs editor for Channel 2, Arad Nir, to try and make sense of this recent agreement. A pleasure to have you with us.
But before
thank you so much. And before we start, let's take a look at the following report of the latest from the Ukraine.
This is not what Ukrainian leaders expected. Nevertheless, fire returned to eastern Ukraine. Less than 2 days after a ceasefire was announced between Ukraine and pro-Russian separatists, heavy shelling was recorded in the eastern city of Mariupol. In another incident, a strong explosion shook Donetsk airport. A woman was killed and 4 other people were injured during the incidents.
Ukrainian troops are in full compliance with the truce conditions and ceasefire. At the same time, over the past 24 hours, some of our checkpoints were shelled by the terrorists. For example, positions of Ukrainian servicemen near Mariupol were shelled.
Everything looked different on Friday when the sides agreed to sign a 12-step truce, which raised hopes of an end to long months of fighting.
Good day. I think we have good news. We just signed a protocol which consists of 12 paragraphs, but the most important of them is an immediate ceasefire, which should start at 6 p.m. Kiev and Minsk time today.
Last Friday, NATO leaders meeting in Wales approved a special rapid force spearhead in the region. But as fire returned to East Ukraine, a resolution to the conflict is far from in sight.
Neil, Senior Foreign Affairs Editor for Israeli Channel 2. Ceasefire signed just a few days ago, but shelling, does it even hold water?
Well, let's put things into proportion. There are marginal skirmishes at this point of time during this weekend. Usually when ceasefires go into effect, it takes some time until it withholds.
Don't we know that?
So, yeah, that's it. I mean, we've been exercising it now and again. Now, no one knows which direction will this ceasefire take, but the agreement that the sides reached under the auspices of the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, in Minsk over the weekend, actually gives reason for optimism because it does cover the needs of both sides. We must remember that it's quite funny. Thomas Friedman from the New York Times actually mentioned over the weekend some similarities between the struggle with ISIS to the struggle over Ukraine. The similarities are that in both places we are dealing with forces that are trying to fight against the imperialist separation of states, or imperialist drawing board in which they drew the regional map. Same in the Middle East by Sykes-Picot, and same in in Eastern Europe by Molotov-Ribbentrop, right. Just during the Second World War. So the point is that Ukraine is not an homogeneous entity. There is no historical Ukraine. Ukraine is made of few forms of population, West-leaning and Russian-speaking, and the Russian speakers of Ukraine were cut off Russia because of these drawing boards maps. So the idea of this ceasefire that was reached during the weekend is to give some sort of autonomy to the Russian-leaning population of Ukraine. The question under the framework of the Ukrainian state. So we must see, you know, it's not an easy task to reach, and meanwhile it seems that the sides are willing or wishing to reach a conclusion over there. We'll have to see how it works because of the extremists on both sides.
Well, then that's an interesting point that you're raising. First of all, when you create autonomous entities in Eastern Europe, I mean that has a history of also not boding so well. If we look at past the end of the 20th century wars out there, that never worked well. But the Russian separatists, and I'm wondering out loud with you, I mean, they have the backing of Russia. We can, say that they're not really funded by them. They're not getting the weapons, but we all know that's there. Has Putin given up in the Ukraine? And that's I think, also one of the million-dollar questions.
Putin will never give up on Ukraine. On the other hand, Putin, I do not believe that his final aim is to conquer Ukraine and to annex the whole of Ukraine into Russia, as he did with the Crimean Peninsula. Putin wants to keep Ukraine as a buffer zone between Russia and the European Union and the NATO states. He has Belarus to the north, right. And he wants to keep, that's his strategic aim. Helping the Russian speakers over Ukraine is a pretext. Probably acceptable right. Pretext in certain eyes, but it is a pretext. The point is that, once the calls to annex or to associate Ukraine with the European Union and with NATO rise, then Putin operates. Then Putin gets into action. So, we've been talking, we've been actually following over the weekend the NATO summit in Wales, in which NATO members said that they are willing to send troops into Ukraine. But we must remember, it's NATO members, it's not NATO as an organization. NATO is going to enforce its presence in the Baltic states, in Poland, all NATO members already. NATO cannot help as such, as an organization. It cannot help Ukraine because of the rules of NATO. But NATO members can help Ukraine. Now, the point is that if
sounds like the advisors in Iraq. Anyways, the same thing. As
I'm bringing Thomas Friedman again to this table. There are many similarities between these two conflicts. And mind you, in Iraq, you've been talking in the beginning of this hour about the coalition against ISIS. There's room for Putin there as well, because ISIS is causing lots of threat and danger to Russia as well. So, this whole NATO issue, this whole geopolitics is going to tremble a bit before it settles down.
Before it settles down. Arad Nir, Israel's Channel 2 Senior Foreign Affairs Editor, thank you so much. When we get back, as the U.S. resumes its airstrikes on ISIS targets in Iraq, we will take a closer look at counterinsurgency and its after effects through the eyes of some of the world's leading experts, gathering now at the 14th Annual Counterterrorism Conference at the IDC in Herzliya. First, though, some headlines. welcome back. It is still Monday, September 8th, 2014. This is still the morning edition where you should be. Last I checked, I am still Yael Aviv. Now, thank you for staying with us. On to the 14th International Counterterrorism Conference happening at the IDC's International Institute for Counterterrorism in Herzliya. Conference is launching its sessions at a time when the world is gripped by ISIS, the Islamic State, and the attempt to combat it. Most of Israel's leading political figures will be at attendance, as well as international researchers and experts. Now let's check first with I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev, who is presently at the conference, joining us on the phone. Tal, who is at attendance when it comes to the political echelon of Israel, and what is expected?
Good morning, Yael. Of course, sometimes they say in these conferences that the time and place is everything. So definitely the time and place for this 14th annual conference of the Institute for Counterterrorism is definitely perfect. And we do see more and more, as we speak, there are more and more foreign officials arriving, foreign experts, foreign professors, and foreign officials that all deal with terror. But the highlight of this day of the conference, the opening day of the conference, will be a long line of Israeli security cabinet ministers that will be arriving here and addressing the audience. And this is the chance for all of them to actually present their current views for the first time in a very thorough way after the Operation Protective Edge. So we can definitely expect a lot of headlines coming from both the ministers regarding the operation and the aftermath of the operation, but of course also the growing threat of the Islamic State and the concern it does raise in Israel and in the rest of the free world and the Western world.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, headlines though are not making them making their way out of there from the conference. There's some other news this morning, isn't it?
Well, yes, definitely. There are still a public rift between the security cabinet ministers that will continue to occupy us, the media, and probably the public in the upcoming days. Netanyahu does have disagreements, vast disagreements inside the security cabinet on a long range of issues, but primarily on the way Netanyahu and his defense minister Ya'alon did deal with the operation and the aftermath of the operation, and specifically the negotiations with Hamas, and of course the future of the negotiations with the Palestinian Authority. All of this will be probably looked for in all of the cabinet ministers' speeches today.
All of the sessions and behind doors. Tal Shalev will be there covering it for I-24 News. Now, the U.S. military said Sunday it launched airstrikes against ISIS in western Iraq in an effort to prevent its fighters from capturing the vital Haditha Dam. That is just another step in trying to combat the Islamic State group, whose antics have proven more violent than any former foe. Now, let's take a look first at the following report.
Arab League chief Nabil al-Arabi said Sunday that the Islamic State must be confronted militarily and politically as Arab diplomats gathered in Cairo to discuss strategies of fighting what he called a cancerous and terrorist group. But as the members of the Arab League continue to debate whether to back Western intervention in the fight against the IS, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry announced a new international coalition to fight the militants and the flow of foreign fighters to the Islamic State group.
If the United States can get Turkish and Arab help in shutting off the sort of economic links that allow the Islamic State to function, to illegally export oil, to basically deal with capital, the Islamic State's current financial basis becomes far, far more tentative.
The initial coalition effort is expected to focus on Islamic State forces in Iraq. On Saturday, the United States launched a new series of airstrikes against the Sunni fighters in the country in order to stop the militants from seizing an important dam in Anbar province, some 175 miles from Baghdad. The strikes represent another expansion of the limited campaign that President Barack Obama had outlined for Iraq last month. Kerry said the NATO allies will stand behind a new Iraqi government in its fight against the Islamic State, but that a new and inclusive government in Iraq is critical for stopping the jihadists. The question that remains is whether the newly formed Iraqi government will also prove to be a dominant ally.
I'm very glad to be joined in studio by Ruthie Sinai, senior news editor for I-24 News, and Daniel Sheikh, former Israeli ambassador to France. Ruthie, I would like to start with you. President Obama is due to give a speech this week to basically relay his campaign plans, to the American public when it comes to the Islamic State in Iraq. It seems like a sad state of affairs when it comes to this replay. What can he even do when he claims that there are no troops, that will be allowed into Iraq to combat this new threat?
Yeah, this speech of his on Wednesday, it's almost a Greek tragedy, the story.
Very much so.
Because Obama, who campaigned on, pulling out of all these hotspots and dealing with domestic issues, and is really being sort of forced against his will, quite obviously, into dealing with these issues. To the point of what he's going to say and what he can say. Look, not much. I mean, the air campaign is the first stage of what he's talking about. There have been something like 150 sorties, and there will be more. Yesterday, as you mentioned, they increased the strikes around the Haditha Dam, which, if the rebels get their hands on,
that's
could
very
be
strategically,
very strategic.
Bad.
They could start flooding Baghdad, basically. And the big question, though, is, after the airstrikes, I mean, to what extent will they be really able to stop the Islamic State from expanding? And the question there, and the answer, I think, there, and that's probably going to be one of the issues at this conference today, too, is that, it's of limited effectiveness. I mean, they're going to be able to bomb and bomb and bomb, but in order to actually, take them out of their warrens and hideouts and strongholds on the ground in Anbar province, and especially in eastern Syria, that's a question of whether that can be accomplished through air raids is a big, big question mark. And from what I understand, most experts are thinking that the answer is no.
Is most likely no. The terrifying thing about this, and former Ambassador Daniel Sheikh, when you look at counterinsurgency, that's one of the things also that will be discussed at the IDC conference. It has a history, and especially for the United States, for backfiring. You go in expecting oranges, you come out with apples, and I'm being very mild about this. And we saw this happening, as first as Vietnam, we see this in Iraq 2003. So my fear is, isn't there another animal that can spark up from an action like that? Isn't that what happened with ISIS? And what can be done?
Of course there is, and like in every good Greek tragedy, there are many layers to it.
Right.
To begin with, let's not forget that President Obama's foreign policy debut was in his first administration, was this big opening up to the Muslim world, which turned out to completely backfire, never worked out, is held against him as one of the big
in Cairo, calling Mubarak my good friend.
It remains as in the image of most people as really one of his very, very big mistakes.
Right.
So on the one hand, maybe he has a chance here to make amends. Maybe he can mobilize the Arab League, build a coalition against the really bad guys. I don't know. But it's clear that he's being, like the entire Western world, are being dragged into this by the repeated show of images of the decapitation of 2 journalists. Right. That's the reason that's bringing them in.
That was the trigger.
And talking about asymmetric warfare, here you have something asymmetrical. You have the entire world suddenly panic-stricken because of the force and the power of these images. I'm not saying that it's not a worthy cause to fight ISIS. It's clear.
Why is this
it's clear, but it infiltrates every home in Europe and in the United States. Plus, add to that the fact that, at least for the European countries, there's a very real threat of their own citizens being implicated in this, fighting currently in Iraq or in Syria, and then coming home, as we've seen certain examples. So I think that is the reason why everybody is so strongly mobilized, with the big caveat that nobody in the Western world wants to return to a real battlefield in the Middle East. They have such a bad experience about it.
And that's exactly the nature of terrorism. That's exactly the problem with it, is that, you've got on the one hand, it's just such a classic case of limitation of power, because as Danny said, you're going to have, these coalition forces, and you're going to have F this plane and F that plane. And big bombs and smart bombs and stupid bombs and whatever. But, and the latest in high-tech technology. But then you've got these militias. There's a great picture this morning of these IS militiamen on a truck with a sack of onions. It's just so primitive. It's just
it seems to be winning, and that's the thing.
That's the nature of terrorism.
And you cannot combat it with all the smart technology. Do stay with me, though. We are joined from the conference in Herzliya by Dr. Amichai Magen, a senior researcher at the International Institute for Counterterrorism. And Dr. Magen, good morning to you. You are going to hold actually a panel about counterinsurgency. And I'm wondering, as we were hearing the discussion here, does it even work? And what do you think, in your educated opinion, could be a way of combating, clearly not with smart bombs, a group like, the Islamic State?
Well, good morning. I think that we need to understand the systemic nature of this crisis. We need to understand that we're really in a state, I think for the first time since the end of the Cold War, in a real situation of what I would describe as governance contestation between the liberal international order, the state-based international order, which includes, of course, not just the United States and Europe and Israel, but also moderate Sunni Arab states on the one hand, and an emerging coalition of chaos, a coalition of non-state armed groups that are exploiting this cascade of state failure that we see across North Africa and large parts of the Middle East. And we are at the deeper level here in this early stage of deep contestation between two very different visions of the world. So we need to understand that. The images that have been flooding our TV screens, these horrific, sadistic acts, can lead us to the conclusion that we're dealing with a bunch of mindless thugs. But that would be a misconception. First of all, we need to understand that the Islamic State is not a standalone organization. It's part of a network of these radical Salafist organizations that extend from Al-Shabaab in Somalia to Boko Haram in Nigeria, to Al-Nusra in Syria, to radical jihadists in Sinai, and the list goes on and on. Number one, and that these guys have a vision. They have a vision of the world, establishing a radical Islamist caliphate, and they view themselves as in a deep contestation and a deep competition with us, the Western world. So we need to understand what's at stake here. If we are going to make a dent in this and develop a long-term strategy.
If you're going to make a dent in them, and if that's what they see, then isn't any type of action, as President Obama, is planning to take, which we don't know exactly what, isn't that going to actually create the exact complete opposite, the exact opposite of what we are trying to do is actually combat them? Isn't it playing into their hands by actually fighting them, the infidels coming in, or, not the infidels in this case, but coming in and actually playing the role that they want us to play?
No, I don't think so. I think that they view themselves as being a vanguard of a global Islamist revolution, and they see the consequences of the Arab state, the opportunities that have opened up across vast areas in North Africa and the Middle East, as an opportunity to implement their theology, to implement their political plan. And so far, they seem that it looks in their eyes that they're on the rise. They're winning. They've had these quick, massive gains in Iraq and Syria, and so far they feel that they are unopposed. It's not as if they're going to stop. It's not as if they're going to moderate if we don't counter them. It's quite the opposite. Unless we take decisive action now, doing this in the future is going to be much more difficult, because they are going to learn. They're going to learn how to govern. They're going to learn how to hold territory. They're going to acquire new assets, and they're going to radicalize tens of millions and possibly hundreds of millions of young Muslim kids. And then we're going to be in a much tougher situation. Right. So I think that, sure, there are costs to doing this. I know that there's tremendous reluctance in the United States to get engaged in another conflict in the Middle East. But we have to ask ourselves, what are the consequences? And we have to remember that the jihadists are counting on us not to do anything. Part of their aggression stems exactly from their conviction that we have a very weak American president and that the Americans have been punched in the nose.
Yeah, but I mean, Dr. Amichai, at the end of the day, when there was a quote-unquote strong American president that went ahead and pulled in many, hundreds of thousands of troops into the Middle East, we saw the results of that. We saw the result. Bin Laden seems to be like the UN next to the Islamic State.
Well, but we know that two wrongs don't make a right. The fact that the Bush strategy in Afghanistan and Iraq, and that's a whole different topic in itself. It requires deep analysis. Produced some very negative externalities and unintended consequences that should not lead us to the conclusion that the right attitude now is one of passivity. Because, as I say, we're talking about a movement that has a very clear, determined, religiously motivated theology. They're going to
sadly,
try to
implement. But sadly, Dr. Amichai, that's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us. Ruthie Sinai,
thank you.
Ambassador Daniel Sheck, thank you for being with me this morning. Coming up next, no more war, no more bloodshed. For this morning, rather, a wrap-up of the Venice Film Festival. First, the headlines. Good morning, and thank you for staying with us. I-24 News Morning Edition, where you should be, and I will tell you why. Because I'm flanked by two gorgeous men. Yes, I'm back. One of them being, everybody leave the room, please. One of them being Tony Grant, who's, never last with the Web Review, my favorite, and Gabi Tartakovsky. I will get it right one day.
One day.
Yeah, for the most important news and the best news and nothing about war. And first up, Tony, with the web, anything that's going viral and spiraling out of control out there.
Can we talk?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Let's talk about Joan Rivers, because yesterday, of course, in Manhattan, it was the funeral to end all funerals, and it was a happy funeral, and in a way. I mean, this was a
funeral to end all funerals.
Yes. I mean, this was.
Damn, I missed you. Yeah, okay.
Now you've got to laugh, because I think that's what Joan Rivers probably would have liked, because she apparently had some thoughts in advance about how she would like her funeral to be.
Right.
And it more or less unfolded along those lines. I mean, it was a very star-studded event. We had Howard Stern giving the eulogy. There were people
Let's pause
in
on
back.
that for a second.
Yes.
Howard Stern giving the eulogy.
Unless I got my facts wrong.
No, you got it right. You got it right. Yeah.
One loudmouth to another.
Yeah, no, it's Howard Stern.
Yeah, two Yentas. Anyway, I didn't hear the eulogy, but I'm going to have to look it up, because I think it's going to be fabulous.
That's your mission for tomorrow. Obi-Wan, shall you choose
check
to
it out,
accept it? Yes.
analyze it. Whoopi Goldberg was there, Bernadette Peters, Sarah Jessica Parker, Kelly Osbourne, who was, of course, her co-host on The Fashion Police on E!, which was sort of, that was sort of Joan Rivers reborn, I think.
The Fashion Police,
yeah, because you and I probably know her more from her time as
stand-up and
filling in for Johnny Carson.
Exactly.
And
I love you for mentioning my age.
Yeah. So flattering.
You're ageless. The thing is, we're seasoned.
Yeah,
we're seasoned.
Yeah, I'm like Shimon Peres.
Yeah.
I never get old.
It's good to mention our sort of seasoning in the sense, because now I think people can look up clips of Joan Rivers on YouTube and see how her comedy was fantastic in the 80s and the 90s, up until last month, talking about Israel and Gaza and the conflict. I mean, she was always just unapologetic and funny.
That's the thing that stuck in my mind, that video of her saying, if New Jersey was shooting at New York, we'd demolish
New Jersey,
exactly.
Yeah, which would be great in some levels.
As if we need excuses to demolish New Jersey.
Yeah. Ooh, you're not going to get invited to Chris Christie's place anytime soon.
No, there you go. But I think
thing.
We don't understand, and Tony, you help me out, just how painful this was for Americans. You yourself said to me.
Very painful. I mean, coming on the heels of Robin Williams, which of course was one of in the United States, a huge shock.
Right.
I mean, that of course shocking for the reasons that we know all too well. But this also, we mentioned the NYPD is investigating Joan Rivers' death because
it shouldn't have happened in this way.
I don't know medically speaking, but there's some questions that are being asked, and I think the answers will be coming out in the days and weeks ahead. But it's adding to the shock shock value of someone who, there's a picture of Kelly with her crazy hair.
Wait a second. Okay.
Yeah.
Don't come to my funeral with that hair. Okay. I need that as a promise.
But the picture. I love this picture because it shows
she wore
how
black.
Yeah. And the appeal across generations, because now, and I would say my generation as well as yours is raised in political.
The older generation.
Yeah, older generation. PC, political correctness, right?
True.
But someone like Kelly Osbourne looks at Joan Rivers as someone who's like says whatever she wants and gets away with it, never apologizes.
Stands behind it.
Owns it, and it's something that these days, you have to apologize for every little tweet that, someone misinterprets it. Joan.
Yeah. Have a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Said the Jew. Yeah.
And speaking again of Joan, and now of course I think the same thing happened with Robin Williams. Her book sales are spiked upward, like 90,000% increase in the people that are buying her Diary of a Mad Diva book, other Joan Riversian literature. I am going to be buying the book actually, and and I haven't read since 1974, but.
Which was the year you were born.
Right.
Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Exactly.
I'm not good at numbers.
Yeah.
So that's
well, that's one way of getting a book sold. Yeah, I never said that.
But it does speak to the fact that she's the popularity is just
soaring.
Is soaring. And speaking of books, which are also popular, that brings us to France. Yes. Now.
Where we love to go.
Where we love to go, but if you're looking for Valerie Trierweiler's tell-all, which is called Merci pour ce moment, or Thanks for this moment, it's sort of like Thanks for the memories.
Yeah. Tongue in cheek. Yeah.
Tongue in cheek. Not all French booksellers are stocking the book.
Really?
It's a bestseller, but some booksellers are putting up signs saying things like, "We're not going to be the sort of like the trash can for this soap opera kind of thing."
Seriously?
Seriously, yeah. It was picked up in the Telegraph newspaper, the British paper. Of course, they love to kind of track these scandals over in the UK.
Right. I think are we looking at that right now? That's a Joan River book, but it's
that's the same feeling you would have if you go into a French bookstore looking for the tell-all and you don't find it because.
No, I love that story because you and I had many parties over that. Over that.
A sad and complicated affair, but of course we say hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, and apparently Francois Hollande was devastated. Devastated. Yeah. That's what the headline said. They were devastated by this tell-all, and
Crimea River.
At the same time, perhaps wooing her back. There were some reports. Yes.
Seriously?
We'll see. Now, I think she's over him. But anyway, it's something that we're following.
So many ways. In so many ways.
Yeah.
And
so anyway, book shopping in Paris, interesting stuff. In New York City, it's Fashion Week again.
Yes.
And apparently one of the hot new looks is sweat.
How so?
Sounds like the Tel Aviv Fashion Week.
Yeah, well, your sweaty face is now a runway sensation if you're a model in New York, and apparently.
Explain, because I missed that when I lived there, and
it's hot out still. It's still summertime in Manhattan, and it's apparently that look is the outside look of hot and bothered is translating well into an aesthetically captivating sweaty surprise. I mean, models are trying to look sweaty even if they're not.
What do you? I mean, how do you work that? You keep your sweat in a bottle, then you spritz yourself. I mean, does it come with it? Does Mac have a sweaty line?
I don't know. I mean,
the Schmitz line.
You look in it. You try to psych out Obama on his next speech, and you start to get the sweat.
Schmitz galore. My God, look at them. Yeah, I feel. Yeah.
So that's also, of course, who tore up Fashion Week, but Rihanna. She favored a minimalist look at the Altuzarra show.
That's the minimalist
Saturday.
look?
Yeah.
That's the Rihanna minimalist look.
This is now interesting about this photo is the choker necklace.
It's very minimalist, Tony.
Yeah, now apparently it's a trend now. It's like the thick choker-style necklace.
No, we're not back to that, are we?
Yeah, I think we are. So tomorrow I expect to see a choker there.
When was the choker up? Wasn't it the 80s?
The 80s. Joan Rivers used to wear chokers, didn't she?
She did, but I think a woman of a certain age, and I'm allowed to say than Joan, God bless you, I think a woman of a certain age will favor the choker because of, the neckline.
Right.
But if you're still as, extremely
so smooth.
like
swan-like.
Yeah, swan-like. Exactly.
And you don't really need the choker.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah,
some people talk about it, but it looks great on her. And
yeah, you're
anyway.
really on a fan, and you can't keep down. And
bacon.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's talk about Alain Ducasse, French super chef. Too many Michelin stars, I can't even count them. He has cut meat from his menu at his famous restaurant at the Hotel Plaza Athénée in Paris, and it's causing a stir.
His French citizenship?
He has not, but he is seeking inspiration from the cereals and vegetables of the Sun King Louis XIV. And he's trying to basically reinvent French cuisine,
around that.
But we're talking, $492 per meal for like a lunch, for example, for things like black rice with shellfish or quinoa and shellfish.
How much for quinoa?
$492.
I was the first one to say.
Now here's the best part.
Quinoa.
Yeah. Well, with shellfish. If you ask for cream or caramel with chocolate, he will not give in to such requests. Do you know why? He says it's just globalization.
Oh, yeah. It's hundreds of pounds for the quinoa, but chocolate and caramel is globalization.
Yeah. So,
and I'm sorry, and pork is out on the menu?
Pork is out, apparently, unless you want to make it yourself, which brings me to this end of summer treat, bacon Bloody Mary popsicles. They look like that.
Now that's a cuisine.
Now that's cuisine.
I ask you folks, what is life?
You're not going to be finding this on the menu at Ducasse, but you can certainly make it yourself for sort of like a pocket brunch.
Honey, that to me is food to die for. And Gabi, wouldn't you? Hold on, I can't stop looking at that bacon.
Bacon-infused vodka is the key ingredient.
Man, as we said, Gabi Tartakovsky. Yes. What is life without bacon or without, what was it? What film festival? What
the Venice Film Festival, which wraps up.
We're shallow people here. Yeah. Wraps up with what?
With Golden Lion awarded to Roy Andersson's final installment in his trilogy about living. It's called A Pigeon Set on a Branch Reflecting on Existence. Catchy, right? Well, this is...
No, exactly. And again, a moment of, when you look at that on the, what am I going to watch tonight? I'm going out to the movies.
Yes.
That doesn't really, yay, let's go. A pigeon sat on the what?
Sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah. Bring out the popcorn. It's not something you sit there and go like that.
Something the entire family can enjoy.
Absolutely.
Good family, interesting fun.
Yes, well, apparently Anderson keeps them coming every 7 years. The first installment was it.
7 years?
It takes him 7 years for the pigeon to finally find its place in the world. This is a trilogy that explores the human condition, and Anderson, upon accepting the award, said that films should be more humane than they are. As in recent years, obviously he's not a big fan of the Hollywood blockbusters.
Clearly,
and neither is the Venice jury.
Don't we feel though that in the Middle East we explore the human condition on a daily basis? Yeah,
and that's why I keep watching cartoons over and over again.
Peanut Man.
Yes.
Here and there. Okay.
Yes. Also winning it big in Venice, the film Hungry Hearts. Adam Driver, whom we know from the hit series Girls, won Best Actor award. So he's going places, and he's also appearing for the second time in a row in the new Noach Baumbach film. So he's actually a rising star, and is now pretty established. And it's a pretty amazing journey from being the on-screen boyfriend of Lena Dunham to be awarded at Venice. That's quite a journey.
Maybe he's the next pigeon on the fence.
Maybe.
You never know. No, definitely. Good hit series. Yes.
Good news for Israeli cinema as well. At Venice, the film The Farewell Party won the Venice Days Showcase Award for People's Choice Awards.
Right. Whose film is that? I know nothing about it.
Well, the film actually is interesting because it includes a large cast of Israel's finest and older actors and comedians such as Zev Revach. It's a bittersweet comedy which tells the story of a group of elderly who help their friend who is dying.
Right.
So now the film already gone into distribution in Germany and other lucrative deals. There's also talks about being distributed in France and Japan. So So this film is going places.
No, and I love seeing films actually that deal with the human condition also in later stages in life, and plus coming out of Israel, not just about the conflict, so to speak, which is always
I think that's the refreshing point of view that audiences overseas were dying to see.
Right. No,
dying is no pun intended, but
ouch. Yes. That we have time for one more, so we're going to look. Bill
Murray. The Toronto Film Festival honors the great Bill Murray in its own Bill Murray Day. Now, you would think that a Bill Murray Day should be Groundhog Day.
Exactly.
Following the cult classic Groundhog Day, which Bill Murray starred in 1993. Anyway,
people of our age know of.
Yes.
And Caddyshack.
And Caddyshack.
Yeah, wow. And Meatballs.
And Meatballs. True.
Okay, so...
which day is Bill Murray Day now, according to the Canadians?
It was September 5th, and they shown a retrospective of Bill Murray's films, held a Q&A, gave him a golden plastic crown. He was there. He was largely... Usually he's a bit standoffish when it comes to dealing with the press.
Right.
Yes, he doesn't have a mobile number. He has his own 1-800 number in which movie agents, Wes Anderson, they all call him on his 1-800 and pitch him movie ideas. This is true story.
True story.
True story.
But it still, makes you wonder though, why the Canadians? I mean, isn't it so Canadian to just wake up one day and say, Bill Murray. Let's give him a day.
Americans don't recognize their greatest own.
Yes.
Joan Rivers needs a week. Yeah, right. She needs a week, or Chinese year, or something like that. Or a fortune cookie,
or a Shabbat dinner.
Or Shabbat dinner, exactly, as you said. Boys, amazing. So Bill Murray gets a day. I don't know how it's observed, but we will observe it.
Yes. Well, Toronto Film Festival observed it also by screening his latest film called St. Vincent, in which he already again plays this grumpy old man, a war veteran in this case, who befriends a young boy, and hilarious outcome ensues. That's how you pitch Bill Murray on his 1-800 number.
Okay, boys, men, my guys, this is the end of our show as it ensues. But thank you for staying with us, all of you. Please do not. You can check us out, of course, on the web, Facebook, Twitter, I24 News, the morning edition, where you should be every single morning because we're watching you. So join us tomorrow. Thank you.